Welcome friends, this is Sarah, the artist behind Flourishing Fibers. Today we are working on the paper embroidery pattern Paloma. You will find the link to all the patterns and tools I use in the video description. I also offer pre-printed paper cutouts, so make sure you check those out as well. A few things before we dive in. First, I'd really appreciate it if you could give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me keep creating new content and sharing my embroidery passion with you all. Secondly, I apologize for the state of my hands and if the scratches disturb you. My cat got out the other day and I had to wrestle her out of the bush and she got a little crazy. But she's okay, I'm okay, and my hand doesn't look great, but yeah, so sorry about that. Finally, you will notice that the lighting isn't great. I had to record this on multiple days, mainly in the evening without natural light, so it wasn't an ideal situation, but I had to get it done. I think that's it, so let's get started. For this project, you're going to need all three tips from your awl: the ultrafine, the fine, and the heavy. Now, I like to use my heavy point in a way that achieves a smoother result. First, I make a hole using the fine point, then I use the heavy to enlarge the hole. Don't go too far down, you just need to make the hole large enough to pass thread about 6 times. To get started with the embroidery, we will work out from the center out. The reason is that the large flower in the center of the dove requires a stitch that will require the needle to go below straight stitches. Getting this section done first will prevent any snagging on any surrounding work. For specifics on thread count, thread color, and where to start and end a stitch, please refer to your project instructions. I will reference thread counts in some parts of this tutorial, but again, check out your download. The straight stitches in the center and outside must be done using light tension. As I mentioned, we will be passing thread below them, and we want to make sure that we're able to pass okay. A good way to release some tension is to take the needle and loosen up the stitch. Once you're done, tie off your ends and then move on to creating the petals. These petals are very easy to create, but as more of them form, maneuvering the needle to avoid snagging will get tricky. That's why we want to get this part done first. Each petal is creating by stitching 4 ovals. These are super easy. You just go below the straight stitches, and when you're done, you finish up the stitch by going back down the same hole you came up. We created the leaves using a back stitch for the center and a fly stitch for the shape. The back stitches should be stitched using light tension because just like for the flower, we're going to be going below these stitches. So this is one part where you're going to need to double up your thread to create the shape of the leaves. A quick tip to achieve a fuller effect is to just let go of your threaded needle as you're working once in a while to unravel thread that's been twisted. The next part we will move on to is the shape of the wing shown here. This is actually 2 stitches transitioning into one another. We start off on the right using stem stitch, and once we get to the bold line on the pattern, we switch to a reverse chain stitch. We will use the last stitch of the stem stitch as our starting stitch for the chain stitches. I know that is quite a mouthful. So all you need to do is slide your needle below the last stem stitch and back down the same hole to create that first link. After that, you continue to slide your needle below the previous links to continue the chain. Now I'm moving on to the bottom part of the wing, which also has a transition, but this one is with thread color. Your pattern will have a bold hole marking. That mark indicates when the transition should start, so keep an eye out for that. From here on out, the order in which the rest of the elements are accomplished is really up to you. I'm moving on to complete the small yellow flowers. These are all done using straight stitches, but you need to use 12 strands and very light tension. I like to create these by first stitching the center petal and then stitching the other two. I also like to keep my flowers consistent by stitching them all in the same order, so center petal, then outer. The pink flowers are made using detached chain stitches. I also prefer to stitch them by creating the center petal first, followed by the two on the sides. For this part of the flower, you will stitch it using 2 strands, and the French knot is only 1 turn on the needle. It makes for a really tiny knot. I'll go over French knots in more details when we get to the dove's halo and the branch's berries. The stem of the 2 flowers inside the dove and the stems of the branches surrounding the dove are stitched using whipped backstitch. The base of this stitch is backstitch, then we wrap a thread around that backstitch. For the 2 flowers, we use the same color thread, which add bulks and softens the curve. This technique will be more noticeable when we're working on the outside branches, since we will be using contrasting thread colors for that. The beak and the eye are created using straight stitches, and we're only using 2 strands for those. For the eye, make sure you outline it using backstitch, then connect the dots as indicated in the instructions. The rest of the wings are completed using backstitch. The knots for the halo are created by wrapping your needle once and then going back down the same hole you originally came up. I like to hold tension on the working thread to create a rounder knot. You can make them looser and flatter. It's all a personal preference. We already covered the basics of the whipped back stitch. Here we are using that same stitch but with 2 colors. I like to have my needles threaded and ready to go with the correct colors. After completing the back stitches, I like to start the whipping at the beginning of the leaf and working my way down. When I get to the bottom of the branch, I just continue whipping. When I'm done with the whipping, I move on to stitching the straight stitches and back stitches for the leaves, since my needle is already threaded with the correct thread color. There we go, I've covered all the stitching techniques for this embroidery project. Let's move on to assembling the paper panel. I'm using CUBIES foam tape and craft glue from a company called Barely Art. You'll find links to this in the video descriptions. For the CUBIES, I'll be using the taller size, which is 1/4 inch. I place the cubes around the edge, but not too close so it won't be visible. I also like to place them in empty sections that might help give support to prevent sagging over time. When you are done placing the tape and peeling the backer, take your time to align the front to the back and press down gently. To attach a cord, you go in through the back and tie a knot, leaving some cord at the end. I like to use glue to prevent the cord from fraying. Spread the glue on the cord end and on the knot. Let the glue dry for a few minutes, then come back and trim the cord close to the knot for a clean finish. Once you have your cord attached, you are done. Thank you so much for being part of this project. I hope you had a great time following along. If you enjoyed this tutorial and would like to support me, please consider subscribing to my channel. Again, your support means a lot to me. Have a great day and I'll see you next time. Keep on stitching. Bye.